What if I told you that from the red dust of Ouagadougou, a country once dismissed as poor has just unveiled a $32 billion deep tech giant that even the titans of Silicon Valley never dared to imagine? This is not gossip. This is not foreign aid. This is the very first deep tech powerhouse of West Africa, born in Burkina Faso, and its arrival is shaking the very pillars of global power. Ibrahim Traore's name now echoes with a challenge that pierces every conscience. If those written off as forgotten can create what the mighty once feared, then what excuse do the rest of us have? Stay with me, because what follows is not just another headline. It is a revelation that demands your attention, your dignity, and above all, your response. Thank you for standing with us. The unveiling did not arrive with parades or the thunder of fighter jets streaking across the sky. It came quietly, almost humbly, in a hall so small it could barely contain the hunger of expectation. On that August day in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso revealed something the world had neither anticipated nor even imagined. A nation with fewer high-rises than a Midwestern suburb, a country often ignored in the conversations of Wall Street, had just introduced Africa's first true deep tech company powered by artificial intelligence. And then came the number that stopped the air in everyone's lungs: $32 billion in projected value. Not born from charity, not carved out of foreign handouts, but created by African vision, African sweat, African genius, daring to claim its own future. The figure alone was enough to rattle centuries of arrogance, the arrogance of those who still imagine Africa as a land of begging bowls and broken dreams. But the deeper shock was not the billions flashing on the screen. It was the undeniable question now pressing on the world's conscience. How could a country long dismissed as marginal, painted endlessly in the grays of famine, and coups become the place that birthed what even Silicon Valley had never built for Africa? For decades, global headlines told only of suffering and collapse. They never spoke of labs buzzing with code of algorithms engineered in dusty classrooms of deep tech companies carrying the weight of an entire continent's dignity. Yet in Ouagadougou, in silence, while the world wasn't watching, a counterstory had already been written. Their vision was as sharp as it was simple, a blade cutting through centuries of dependency, artificial intelligence. For the invisible operations, human intelligence for value creation. Invisible operations, how many of our lives are devoured by them? Hours stolen by endless paperwork. Days consumed by reports that no one reads. Years drained by labor that enriches others but leaves our own hands empty. These founders did not speak only to investors or politicians. Their words carried across every kitchen table, where a grandmother sighed at wasted time, across every factory floor, where workers wondered why their sweat built castles for others, but never a home for themselves. By naming the invisible, they robbed it of its power. Consider the paradox. In America, corporations pour billions into technologies designed to squeeze more efficiency from already efficient systems. Yet millions of citizens still feel suffocated by bureaucracies that serve profit before people. In Africa, with scarce resources and fragile tools, a young nation stood and declared, "We will not wait for permission. We will not purchase secondhand code. We will build from scratch with our own imagination, our own struggle, our own hands." And so the question falls heavy on us: if they can take the scraps history left them and spin it into gold, what excuse remains for those of us surrounded by abundance, yet blind to our own potential? This moment unsettles the powerful, and it should unsettle us too. It is like hearing a forgotten hymn sung in a new generation's voice, rising higher than anyone thought possible. Burkina Faso has stepped out from the long shadows of pity and into the blinding spotlight of innovation. And those who once preferred Africa voiceless now flinch at its song. Because shock is not only about the numbers. Shock is about the awakening it triggers within you. When you hear that $32 billion in value has been born not in New York, not in Paris, not in London, but in Ouagadougou, does it not strike something ancient and unbroken in your soul? Does it not remind you that the chains once thought made of iron are nothing more than paper when people decide to tear them? So do not only listen, feel. Look into your own life, your own neighborhood, your own struggles, and ask if Burkina Faso can rise from dust and doubt to this: what is stopping me? What is stopping us? The invisible bonds are snapping, and once they snap in one corner of the world, they can shatter everywhere. And if you believe this, if you sense in your spirit that history is turning, that Africa is beginning to walk with steps that will never again be broken, then do not remain silent. Write one word in the comments, Amen. Let it echo across this space, across screens, across continents. Let it be the first chorus of a movement too loud to be ignored, too powerful to be erased. For decades, the narrative of Africa in the world of technology was always drafted somewhere else. It was scripted in the glass towers of Silicon Valley, in the polished offices of Paris, in the steel skylines of London. The software that arrived on African soil carried assumptions as foreign as the air that birthed them. Algorithms trained on data that had nothing to do with Ouagadougou's heartbeat or Bamako's daily struggle were dropped into banks, hospitals, and schools as if human beings were identical units, as if culture, rhythm, and history did not matter. Dependency was dressed up in the costume of progress, but the disguise was thin. Consider the daily life of a bank director in Burkina Faso. His title radiates importance, yet each morning he wakes to the crushing weight of routines that rob him of meaning. Entire days vanish into endless reports, numbers copied, pasted, typed again and again into systems that produce no vision, no spark of creation. By the time the sun falls, he is exhausted, but not because he has built something lasting, only because invisible tasks have drained his spirit dry. He is not alone. In Bobo Dioulasso, a grandmother stirs her pot of millet while the radio hums in the corner. She hears the phrase artificial intelligence drifting through static and asks her daughter with weary eyes, "Will this ease the burdens my grandchildren carry? Or is it just another promise made in a place that has never seen our faces?" Her voice echoes the unspoken question of an entire continent. The fault lines in this old order did not appear because Africans lacked skill. They appeared because the imported systems never belonged. Imagine forcing a gleaming key into the wrong lock, no matter how polished it cannot open the door. And yet, time after time, African governments were told to bend to pay, to adapt to tools that never fit. Each year, billions of dollars bled away from the continent to rent code that could not even pronounce its languages. Then came a moment that the world barely noticed, but those who lived it will never forget. In Ouagadougou, a group of engineers gathered courage to submit a proposal to the World Bank. Their dream was simple yet revolutionary: localized artificial intelligence built from African data for African problems, guided by African priorities. The response came swift, cold, and predictable. Unrealistic. That word, sharp as a blade, heavy as a curse, has been thrown at Africa for centuries whenever it dares to imagine itself free. Unrealistic to build, unrealistic to innovate, unrealistic to lead. But pause for a moment. What is truly unrealistic? That Africa, a continent of over 1 billion souls, should forever lease its future from foreign hands. That its children should always be consumers, never creators. That a land so vast, so rich, so young, should never write its own code. The absurdity was not in Ouagadougou's dreamers, but in the arrogance of those who dismissed them. For dependency is not a natural law, it is a structure imposed. And what is imposed can always be dismantled. Here lies the paradox. The more the world told Africa you cannot, the louder its children whispered back, "Then we must." In classrooms lit by candles, because the power had failed again, students sketched algorithms in notebooks with broken spines. In crowded internet cafes where the lights flickered, young minds copied lines of code like scripture, refusing to stop. In marketplaces, amid the noise of maize and sorghum prices, the conversation shifted to something new. What if our own people finally built the tools that served our needs instead of chaining us to someone else's? Dependency is heavy, but silent resistance is heavier still. And yet silence began to fracture. Each rejection letter, each insult, each cold dismissal of unrealistic chipped at the walls of resignation. And through those cracks, a light began to seep in. The question now burns not only in Burkina Faso, but in every corner of the globe. If our ancestors endured chains of iron, yet still rose, why should we bow to chains of paper and silicon? If those before us carried weights too great and bent their heads in silence, will we repeat their surrender, or will we lift our voices? The story of dependency has never been just about policies or corporations. It is about us, whether we will raise our children to live by tools forged elsewhere, or whether we will dare to forge our own. And when that silence of resignation began to splinter, when the whisper of defiance was searching for a voice when appeared. A soldier young in years but ancient in conviction who refused to speak the language of surrender. He carried not the tone of dependency but the vision of sovereignty. His name was Ibrahim Traore, and his words would ignite what centuries of silence could not. He was not born into marble palaces, nor raised within the manicured lawns of Ivy League traditions. Ibrahim Traore emerged from the dust as a soldier carrying not privilege, but duty carved into his shoulders. The world first noticed him in uniform, yet what defines him now is not the rifle once at his side, but the blueprint etched within his mind. For when the old order whispered that Africa must forever depend, Traore answered with a voice unshaken artificial intelligence for the operations that enslave us, human intelligence for the creation of value. These were not hollow words. They were a declaration of war against invisibility, against the theft of time, against the lie that Africa could not dream. Picture the room, a chamber filled with leaders worn down by endless debates on debt, on aid, on compliance. Their faces lined with fatigue, their conversations stale. Then Traoré stood young and unbent, his presence a sharp contrast to their gray temples and heavy suits. His words cut through the air like sharpened steel. He spoke not of donations, but of dignity, not of begging, but of building. And his voice traveled far beyond that hall. It reached the radios of farmers tilling the fields, the kitchens of mothers preparing evening meals, the notebooks of students scribbling by candlelight. In the homes of Burkina Faso, those words did not sound like the dry language of politics. They sounded like truth finally spoken aloud. In Ouagadougou, an elderly grandmother leaned closer to her radio, her hands trembling as she listened. Memories flooded back her mother's stories of fields worked for foreign masters, the long sighs of generations whose labor built wealth they never touched. And then she heard Traoré's vow, "The invisible task will no longer rob us of our time." Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in her long life, she believed her grandchildren might inherit a world where their work produced value for themselves, not for distant empires. But vision rarely comes without opposition, especially from those who profit in the shadows. In Washington, think tanks rushed to draft urgent memos. In Silicon Valley, executives whispered nervously behind closed doors. Within weeks, the United States unveiled a $70 million initiative for African AI development, a gesture branded as partnership but dripping with fear. Western media chorused their alarm. Burkina Faso's ambition was dangerous, unstable, unrealistic. But let us ask clearly, dangerous to whom? To the grandmother in Bobo Dioulasso, longing for her grandchildren's freedom, or to those whose fortunes have depended on keeping Africa shackled to dependency? Here lies the paradox. When Africa is silent, the world yawns. When Africa speaks, the world shakes. When Africa obeys, it is praised as stable. When Africa resists, it is condemned as reckless. If this is the definition of stability, then perhaps it is time the continent embraced danger. Dangerous not for its people, but for the system that thrived on their silence. Still, Traoré himself insists one voice cannot be enough. A soldier may raise the banner, but it takes a people to march beneath it. And this, brothers and sisters, is where you come in listening now, from Detroit, from Lagos, from London, from Kingston. Do not consume this story as entertainment, to be forgotten in a scroll. Treat it as a spark meant to ignite. Pass it into your WhatsApp groups, share it with your family circles, speak it in your churches and gatherings. When one voice becomes 10 and 10 become 100, no power on this earth can silence it. In Africa, when the drum is struck in one village, the sound rolls across valleys and rivers until another village answers. Let this video be that drum. Share it widely so that our scattered people, separated by oceans but bound by memory, can hear the same beat and rise to the same call. For sovereignty does not come with applause from abroad. It comes when ordinary men and women decide that they will no longer surrender what belongs to them. And as Traoré's words ripple outward, they no longer belong solely to him. They become the anthem of a continent stretching against centuries of chains. But a song gains its power not in a single voice, but in a chorus. And a chorus demands that each of us add our note. So the question remains, will we sing or will we remain silent? The chorus has already begun. It grows not only in Burkina Faso, but across borders, across languages, across seas. And as the echo spreads, it will not only inspire allies, it will summon adversaries. For the next chapter of this story will not be written only with inspiration, it will be written with resistance. When a stone is cast into still water, its ripples defy boundaries, spreading far beyond the point of impact. The announcement from Ouagadougou was that stone and the waves it sent forth traveled farther, faster, and deeper than even its creators had dreamed. Within weeks, governments, universities, and communities across Africa began to stir. In Nairobi, Kenya's Ministry of Health declared it would begin testing African-built artificial intelligence in its hospitals, insisting that our patients deserve systems designed for our realities, not borrowed codes patched together from elsewhere. In Bamako, Mali, a group of engineers resigned from their government posts to join training programs inspired by Burkina Faso's model. In Niamey, Niger, crowds of students marched through the streets holding banners that proclaimed, "If Ouagadougou can rise, so can we." And the sound did not stop at the continent's borders. In Paris, thousands of African students gathered outside the iron gates of a university. They were not protesting tuition or visas. They stood with laptops in hand and candles raised high, chanting into the night sovereignty, in code sovereignty and life. In London, diaspora families filled community halls. Fathers who had once spent decades working as underpaid security guards, now speaking with pride that their homeland might finally forge its own digital fortress. In Detroit, inside a Sunday church service, the pastor closed. His Bible paused and told his congregation, "Did you hear what happened in Burkina Faso? They are building machines that free human time instead of consuming it. If they can do this with so little, what excuse do we have with so much?" The church hummed with amens, some weeping quietly, sensing they were living in the dawn of a turning age. In Ouagadougou itself, outside the headquarters of the new deep tech company, the old and the new met in harmony. Balafons and drums pounded ancient rhythms, mixing with the electronic hum of servers inside. Mothers carried bowls of food to their children, interning in glass-walled rooms, whispering prayers that this labor would not be stolen, as so much of Africa's sweat and genius had been stolen before. Fathers sat beneath the shade of neem trees, speaking not only of politics but of algorithms, as if the language of sovereignty had finally been enlarged to embrace the language of technology. But where hope rises, opposition sharpens. The International Monetary Fund released a polished statement warning that the proliferation of localized artificial intelligence initiatives could destabilize global markets. The tone was sterile, but the intent was sharp as a blade. Their fear was not instability, it was independence. The World Bank soon echoed the concerns, suggesting that, without Western oversight, African projects risked inefficiency. The irony was suffocating the very institutions that had failed to predict their own financial crises, now lecturing Africa about efficiency. Here lies the paradox. When Africa imports software that drains billions into foreign coffers, no one dares to cry instability. But when Africa dares to code its own, suddenly the earth shakes. Why is dependence dressed up as partnership, while independence is condemned as danger? Why is poverty tolerated as natural, but progress painted as a threat? In homes across the continent, these questions spread faster than official answers could contain them. Around dinner tables, elders and children debated what it meant to control not just their land, but their data, not just their harvests, but their algorithms. In church halls and mosques, prayers rose not only for rain and crops, but for wisdom to guard this fragile new sovereignty from those who would crush it before it bloomed. In Dakar, a grandmother squeezed her grandson's hand and whispered, "You will not grow up bowing your head. You will grow up coding with it held high." What began as an echo had now become a chorus layering faith, tradition, and innovation into a song that no one could silence. But every chorus that rises draws the ears of those who wish to drown it out. And the louder Africa's voice became, the more feverishly the counter-narrative gathered force. For as Burkina Faso and its allies built tools of independence, Western powers sharpened their tools of propaganda. The battlefield was shifting from laboratories to headlines, from data to narrative. And so the question was no longer whether Africa had the capacity to build. That had already been answered. The real question was whether the world would allow that truth to be heard. The moment Africa lifted its voice in song, the West raised its volume in fear. Headlines appeared in polished fonts across the world's biggest outlets: Burkina Faso's reckless tech gamble, unstable nation, dabbles in artificial intelligence, unrealistic ambitions in Ouagadougou. The script was familiar. Every move toward independence was smeared as dangerous. Every cry for sovereignty was twisted into noise. On Western broadcasts, anchors with steady tones warned that Burkina Faso might be playing with fire. But ask yourself, when has the fire of freedom ever burned gently? This was no longer a battle of circuits and servers. The real fight unfolded in living rooms, in cafes, in classrooms, and churches. On American television, paid experts muttered about data insecurity. In European journals, scholars wrote that Africa should not reinvent the wheel. Yet beneath their measured concern was a trembling truth they could not hide. They were never afraid Africa would fail. They were terrified Africa might succeed without them. And while their warnings multiplied, so did our voices. Across social media timelines, Ibrahim Traore's words were clipped, translated, and shared with urgency. His declaration, "Artificial intelligence for operations, human intelligence for value," became more than a slogan. It became a flag. It was whispered in barbershops in Lagos, painted across walls in Bamako, and projected onto community center screens in New York, where diaspora youth gathered late into the night. In Atlanta, one family gathered for dinner. 3 generations sat around the table: a grandmother who once marched in the civil rights era, her daughter who carried the weight of long hospital shifts, and a grandson studying computer science at a local university. The television in the corner flickered with headlines branding "Burkina Faso unstable." The grandmother listened, hands folded tight, and tears streamed down her face. "This is the first time in my life I have heard an African leader say to the world, 'We are not begging.'" Her voice cracked under the weight of history. Silence filled the room until the grandson looked up, eyes glowing with conviction. "If they can do it there," he whispered, "then maybe I can build something here." That table, heavy with food, memory, and hope, became its own front line in the war of stories. And in that moment, Western anchors had already lost, for the truth had pierced the only battlefield that mattered: the human heart. The diaspora did not respond with silence. They answered with movement. In London, young Africans filled the streets, raising laptops above their heads like blazing torches. In Chicago, musicians fused gospel choirs with African drums, composing songs that declared sovereignty was not only a dream but a destiny. On WhatsApp threads, stretching from small villages in Ghana to apartment blocks in the Bronx, clips of Traore's speeches traveled faster than any official broadcast. A narrative planted in fear was being uprooted by one rooted in dignity and pride. And here is where this war of narratives becomes deeply personal. Because you listening now are not just a bystander. You are a voice, and silence, make no mistake, is never neutral. Silence sides with the powerful. If you remain quiet, their headlines will calcify into the only truth recorded. But if you speak, if you stand, if you add your note to the swelling chorus, the truth cannot be buried. So I ask you now, not as an audience, but as family, tell us where you are watching from. Write the name of your country, your city, your village in the comments. Let the world see this is not one nation rising in isolation, but a people awakening across oceans and continents. Let the map of the earth light up with our names, a constellation of defiance, stretching from Ouagadougou to every corner where our blood, our memory, our spirit still lives. For this is not just another headline. This is a battle for memory itself, for dignity, for the sacred right to declare who we are. Their newspapers will yellow and crumble, but our voices carried in millions of whispers and shouts will endure. The noise of headlines is loud, yes, but the murmur of truth multiplied by millions is louder still. And so the world begins to tremble with a question it never wanted to face: if Africa can build without permission, then what else might it dare to reclaim? The answer will not be written in their editorials. The answer will rise from our resolve. And that resolve, unshakable now, is preparing to speak in a voice the world can no longer ignore. There are moments in history when what looks ordinary hides the extraordinary within it. A line of code scribbled in a dimly lit lab, a trembling radio broadcast carried across static, a fragile seed pressed into soil so poor no one believed it could grow. Yet from such beginnings, revolutions have always risen. The unveiling of Africa's first deep tech AI is not simply a technological milestone. It is a prophecy made flesh, a prophecy that declares with clarity, Africa will not kneel again. When Ibrahim Traore stood before his people, his words were not contained by the borders of Burkina Faso, nor by the ears of 20 million citizens. His voice carried across oceans, across centuries, straight into the bones of those who still remember the sound of chains. He declared that the invisible forces would no longer govern our lives. He promised that value would return to the hands of human beings. And whether you sit in a church pew in Detroit, at a family table in Lagos, or in a cafe in Paris, in your heart, this moment is not simply Burkina Faso latest news. It is a message from history itself. What was broken can be healed. What was stolen can be reclaimed. Think about the paradox. For centuries, Africa's wealth was stripped, its brilliance ignored, its children scattered across the world. And now, precisely at the moment when many believed Africa's destiny was sealed, this small nation rises to say, we will write our own code. This is not merely about machines. It is about dignity. It is about a grandmother telling her grandchildren their sweat will not be wasted, their minds will not be dismissed. It is about an elder in a dusty village lifting his head to say, the time of silence is over. The time of pride has come. In the houses of worship across the diaspora, the prayers sound different now. They are no longer whispered only for survival. They are lifted for restoration. In gospel choirs and mosques under starlit African skies, during traditional ceremonies, one refrain is repeated with power: Africa is not finished. Africa is rising. And every mention of Ibrahim Traore's name vibrates with defiance and hope, carrying the energy of something greater than one man. It carries the longing of a people. But let us not deceive ourselves. Prophecy does not complete itself. It needs builders. It needs protectors. It needs you. For what good is $32 billion in projected value if our voices remain silent? What good are algorithms born in Ouagadougou if the diaspora does not claim them as its own? The real question is not whether Africa can innovate. We know it can. The question is whether we will defend what has been born. Will we allow others to rename it, repackage it, and profit from it as they have for centuries? Or will we fight not with weapons of war, but with unity, pride, and the resolve of a people who refuse to bow? The answer begins here with your voice, with your courage to say to the world we see, we know we will not forget. Comment, share, speak, sing, pray. Let this truth move faster than their lies until no headline can bury it. Because if we remain silent, their newspapers will define Africa as reckless. But if we speak, our children will remember Africa as ready. And remember, Ibrahim Traore's vision does not belong to him alone. It belongs to every African child who dreams of writing code, to every laborer who longs for dignity, to every elder who has waited a lifetime to glimpse freedom with their own eyes. When you hear Burkina Faso's latest news, you are not hearing a distant headline. You are looking into a mirror that asks, if they can create so much from so little, what excuse remains for us to stay idle? This is not the conclusion of a report. This is the birth of a movement. We are not witnessing migration. We are witnessing restoration. We are not watching aid. We are watching sovereignty. We are not hearing noise. We are hearing the return of a buried song. And that song will not be complete until you add your voice. So let the world hear us. Let elders in their rocking chairs, pastors in their pulpits, students in their libraries, musicians in their studios, mothers in their kitchens, and fathers at their tables join together in one chorus: we will not beg, we will build. And what we build will not be taken from us again. This is your choice, whether you stand as a spectator or as a participant. History is not patient. It does not pause for hesitation. It moves with those who dare. Stand with Burkina Faso. Stand with Ibrahim Traore. Stand with every African who has declared enough. Because the next headline, the next chapter, the next prophecy will not be written by them. It will be written by us. So I leave you not with closure, but with a call. Hold this moment in your heart. Carry it into your family conversations. Speak it in your community gatherings. Whisper it into your prayers. For this is not only about technology, this is about destiny. And once destiny awakens, it never falls back asleep.